All right, today we are diving deep into one of the most popular books out there, James Clear's Atomic Habits. And we're going to unpack this really powerful idea, how changes that are so tiny you can barely even notice them can somehow lead to absolutely life-changing results.
The whole thing really boils down to this one central question. How is it possible that these tiny, almost invisible shifts in what we do every day can compound over time to create these truly remarkable, massive transformations in our lives?
And believe it or not, the answer starts in a really unexpected place. It starts with the story of a team that was for a very, very long time an absolute laughingstock in their sport.
Yeah, that brings us to the absolutely astonishing story of how the British cycling team completely turned things around.
So before 2003, if you said British cycling, people would probably just laugh. I mean, we were talking about nearly a full century of just mediocrity. In 110 years, not one single British rider had ever won the Tour de France. It got so bad that high-end bike manufacturers literally refused to sell their equipment to the team because they were worried it would make their brands look bad. This was absolute rock bottom.
But then they hired a new guy, a performance director named Dave Brailsford, and he came in with this pretty radical idea he called the aggregation of marginal gains. The concept was actually pretty simple. Find every single little thing that goes into riding a bike and then just improve each tiny piece by just 1%. He was convinced that all those tiny gains would eventually add up to something huge.
And this is where the story gets kind of wild. I mean, they started with the obvious stuff, right? Like, they redesigned the bike seats to be more comfortable, they rubbed alcohol on the tires to get a little bit more grip. But they didn't stop there. Oh no. They hired a surgeon to teach the riders the right way to wash their hands to avoid getting sick. They tested dozens of massage gels. They found the perfect pillow and mattress for each individual rider to get the best possible night's sleep. They even painted the inside of the team truck white, just so they could spot tiny bits of dust that might mess with the finely tuned bikes.
So did all that obsessive 1% stuff actually work? Oh yeah. The result was nothing short of the single most successful run in the entire history of professional cycling. Over the next decade, British cyclists won 17 world championships and 5 Tour de France titles. They went from being a complete joke to an absolute dynasty. And it's just a perfect illustration of the power of these tiny gains.
So how does this actually work? You know, how do these little improvements that seem so insignificant lead to such a massive impact? Well, it all really comes down to some surprisingly simple math.
James Clear has this great line where he calls habits the compound interest of self-improvement. That's the perfect analogy. Just like your money multiplies with compound interest, the effects of your habits multiply every time you repeat them. On any given day, you won't see much of a difference. But over months and years, the effect is absolutely enormous.
Let's just put a number on it to see how staggering it is. If you could get just 1% better each day for a single year, you wouldn't just be 365% better at the end. Because of compounding, you would be nearly 38 times better. That's the mind-blowing math behind small, consistent efforts.
Okay, that all sounds fantastic. But let's be real. We've all been there, right? You start a new habit, you stick with it for a few weeks, and you see basically nothing. And this brings us to a really crucial idea for anyone who's ever tried to make a change and given up.
See, we expect our progress to be this nice, straight, linear line. But in the real world, the most powerful results from any compounding process are delayed. James Clear calls this gap between what we expect and what actually happens the valley of disappointment. It's that frustrating period where you're putting in all the work, but the results just haven't shown up yet. The key thing to remember is your effort isn't being wasted, it's just being stored. It's building up. And this, right here, is the point where most people quit.
The San Antonio Spurs, one of the most consistently great teams in basketball, actually have this quote hanging in their locker room. It's the perfect mindset for pushing through that valley. The idea is that it's not the 101st swing of the hammer that breaks the rock, it's all the 100 swings that came before it. That final breakthrough is just all that stored up effort finally being released.
So if sticking with it is the key, how should we actually think about our ambitions? Well, the book has some pretty counterintuitive advice on this. It says, forget about your goals.
I know, that sounds crazy, right? We're all taught to be goal-oriented. But Clear points out that winners and losers often have the exact same goals. Every Olympian wants a gold medal. So the goal isn't the differentiator. What makes the difference is their systems. Goals are the result you want. Systems are the processes that get you there. If you're a coach, your goal is to win the championship.
Your system is what your team does at practice every single day. When you focus on the system, you create change that lasts, and you get to feel good about the process itself, not just when you cross some imaginary finish line.
And that leads to probably the most powerful and quoted line in the entire book. You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. At the end of the day, it's those daily habits, your system, that determine where you end up, not your big, lofty ambitions.
So this brings us to the final and really the deepest layer of all this. If systems are what drive our results, then what drives our systems? Well, the answer lies in our identity.
Think about behavior change like an onion. The outer layer is changing your outcomes. That's the results, like losing weight. The middle layer is changing your processes. That's your habits, like going to the gym. But the deepest, most fundamental layer, the very core, is changing your identity, what you truly believe about yourself. Most of us try to change from the outside in. We start with what we want, but real, lasting change always happens from the inside out.
Here's a perfect, simple example. Someone who is offered a cigarette might say, "No thanks, I'm trying to quit." Now that sounds good, but what they're really doing is reinforcing their old identity. They still see themselves as a smoker, just one who's trying to stop. Compare that to someone who says, "No thanks, I'm not a smoker." See the difference? It's a small change in language, but it signals a massive shift in identity. The behavior is now just a natural reflection of who they are.
So the ultimate point here is that true behavior change is identity change. The real goal isn't just to achieve something, it's to become someone. The goal isn't just to read a book, it's to become a reader. The goal isn't just to run a marathon, it's to become a runner. Every single action you take is like a vote for the type of person you want to be.
And really, that just leaves us with one simple but incredibly powerful question. Instead of asking yourself, what do I want to achieve? The real starting point for any lasting change is to ask, who do